Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, managing editor over at Wide Right and Natty Light, and now the host of this show for about 6 months now. So I was off last week, taking care of some other stuff or whatever, but in the week and a half since, 2 weeks since last show, we've had some really interesting news, most of it on the recruiting front for Iowa State, that's pretty much all that's going on this time of year, is recruiting here in June. There was a couple pretty significant developments here, especially last weekend. Especially was a really big weekend for official visits. I mean, really all across college football, but especially at Iowa State, where they hosted a couple really important prospects, and they hosted a really important one today on campus on Tuesday. So we're going to talk a little bit about them as well. But the big news of the day is obviously a major commitment flip to a certain blue chips or a certain blue blood school, which is a little unfortunate, but we'll talk about them as well. Mainly talking about recruiting today, but if anybody's got any questions, stuff like that, definitely throw them in the chat. I'm going to throw the link in the chat to be able to jump in as a call-in guest. So if anybody wants to jump in and give your thoughts on the show, like right on the show, sorry, I had a good comment from the Dukester. You've been a loyal watch. The show was actually came on as a call-in guest last time too, so appreciate that. If anybody else would want to jump in as a call-in guest for this week, would really appreciate anybody that has any comments on all of this. We're in the middle of June now, so we're just a few weeks away from conference media days down in Dallas, specifically Arlington at Cowboy Stadium. And then, then it's a few short weeks from there, and then fall camp starts and a few short weeks from there. And you get, we're on our way to Dublin, Ireland. So not too much farther. And actually now in 2 weeks, just a shade over 2 weeks, about 3 weeks actually, is when when College Football 26 comes out as well. So when that comes out, maybe that week we'll do a gameplay stream. We'll play a Cyhawk game on College Football 26 or something. But obviously the big news of the week here is all the big news items are centered here around recruiting. The big one is obviously the news today that the 2026 quarterback commit Jet Tamala has now flipped to Alabama. This was something that I think picked up a lot of steam over the last couple of weeks. So Jet committed back in April. He was an elite 11 guy. He's a top 10 quarterback in the country in his class, and committed back in April. That was seen as a big win because that was, he's the best player in Nebraska. He's, top 10 quarterback. His teammate, one of his wide receiver teammates is already committed to the class. And there was a couple other people from this class that we were looking at. And that was a part of a big coup in the Omaha area in the state of Nebraska. And just in general, Jet would be a great player to have, no matter where he was coming from. But it would, having him so close to home would have been really nice. But unfortunately, that's just not how things work in college football anymore. Now, can you blame a kid for transferring but especially for flipping their commitment to Alabama if they come calling? Is Alabama going forward going to be what they were under Nick Saban? I don't know. Kalen DeBoer seems like a pretty good coach. I'm sure Alabama will continue to be, in the very S tier of college football programs for the foreseeable future. But, they were almost certainly able to offer a significantly larger NIL package. I don't know if that's why he flipped. I would have to imagine that probably at least got his interest. Aside from just them being Alabama, I would have to imagine that the dollars and cents probably played a factor here. What's interesting, though, is that Bama's 2025 quarterback, I believe, is a 5-star. So that's kind of an interesting deal. I'm gonna pull that up here real quick because I want to make sure I'm not misspeaking here. But I want to say that Alabama's 2025 quarterback is a 5-star. Let me just pull that up. So their quarterback, yeah, it's Keelan Russell. He's the number one, or sorry, he's the number two national player, number two quarterback in the country for the 2025 class. So, and he's actually a perfect 100 rating on 247 Sports. So he's not only the number two quarterback in the class, but he is projected to be an early starter and probably eventually a high first round pick in the NFL draft whenever he's available. Um, so Jet's going to be sitting behind a 5-star quarterback for a few years, and I would guess that they're probably going to recruit another 5-star right behind him, or someone that's right up in Jet's neighborhood. That's not to say you shouldn't try to compete, and Alabama's a great program that is consistently competing for national championships and all that. I get all that. However, it is not as though he was committed to a bad program that, that was it's not like I'm trying to I promise I'm not trying to take a personal shot here, but it's not like he was committed to Kent State and that was just his best offer. And then all of a sudden Alabama comes calling because, that's just, the step that it took or whatever. And, someone found something on tape and this kid was committed to Kent State ahead of time and now Alabama's calling. That is not the case here. Iowa State has been a consistent winner for the last decade. So really, most of the time, the Jet Famala has been like conscious to the world around him since he was 7 years old, approximately. 7 or 8 years old. Iowa State has been good at football, and have they won national championships? No, but he is barely old enough to remember. This is a fascinating conversation to have and a fascinating thing to say, but he is barely old enough to remember when Iowa State was really bad at football. So, but now not only are they consistently pretty solid, but now they're in a position where where Iowa State believes, and I think they correctly believe, that they can be in the hunt that they can be in the conference title race most years. Maybe there'll be 1 year here and there where they take a step back if you lose a whole bunch of talent, like after the 2021 season. But I believe, most years Iowa State should be in a position to be competing for the Big 12 title and thus a playoff berth. So it's not, it's not as though he's competing, it's not as though he's, going from a G5 school or whatever to Bama. He's going from a Power 4 school that's near on the top end of its conference and just going to an SEC school. So I would be pretty surprised if money didn't play some factor here, because even a backup, even if Bama never expects Jet to play, they're still going to pay him quite a bit of money, and probably more money than Iowa State can pay him. I mean, and I get it. Like, I'm not the kind of person that doesn't think college athletes should get paid. I mean, they should absolutely be getting paid, as as I believe, as full-time employees, and they should be able to get what they need, what they deserve on the open market. All this, yeah. I'm not contesting his ability or his right to go, make as much money as he thinks he can make. Millions of dollars is a lot of money. He could probably make. He would easily make 7 figures at Iowa State. Maybe not right away as a freshman, but if he became the starter, he would make 7 figures pretty fast. But, at Alabama, even as just an incoming recruit, you're probably making 7 figures right off the jump. And if you become a starter and you're a big name around college football at Alabama, you're making a whole lot of money. You're making first round draft pick in the NFL type money. So I get it. I would be, I don't know how much of a factor the NIL money is in it. I'm not trying to attribute, nefarious motive to him or anything like that, but I'd be shocked if that didn't play a part. And I think you'd probably be lying to yourself a little bit if you said it didn't play any part. It's truly just because Alabama is this prestigious blue blood. Yeah, we get it, but it's not, like I said, it's not like he was going from San Jose State to Bama. He's going from a higher end Big 12 school up to the SEC. It's not nearly that kind of jump. As much as, I'm sure a lot of SEC fans would like to have you believe that it's some massive jump that's just not even in the same neighborhood. He would still have a shot to make, as a starter, he would still have a pretty good shot to make the college football playoff and all that. But it is uh, fortunately for Iowa State is they've done a good enough job with the quarterback room in the Matt Campbell area where, you know, it stings a little bit to lose Jet because he's a great player. But they've done a good job um, in development and recruiting to put in a position where not landing Jet isn't gonna make or break you. People forget Rocco Becht is just a junior this season. He's only played 2 seasons of college football. It seems like he's been here forever, but he's only played 2 seasons of college football, and he has 2 more to go. You know, just because he doesn't have, NFL prototype size, he's not 6'4" with a, laser rocket arm, you know, I for that reason, I think he would have to have a pretty unbelievable season. Like I'm talking like straight up, he's in New York at the Heisman ceremony to be in a position to leave early and be a first round draft pick or something like that, or even a second round pick. Like I think he'd have to have a pretty remarkable season on the national stage, and I mean obviously would have to be in a playoff. A whole lot of things have to go right for Iowa State and Rocco for that to be the case for him to not be back for his senior season. That's not even a knock on Rocco. It's just that, you know, he's not coming from a blue blood. He doesn't have prototype NFL size. And that's just what it is. NFL GMs like drafting 6'5" guys with laser rocket arms that are questionably accurate um, in the top 10. That's what they, that's the kind of guy they like to draft high in the first round and coming out of college without 4 years under their belt. It's just how the world is. Um, you've got Rocco for this year and next year. Then the year after that, you'll still have Connor Mobley in town. He'll be a senior, or it might be a redshirt. He might be a redshirt junior. But Mobley will still be there for a year or two. Or they've done a great job where the guy behind Mobley, Alex Mansky, incoming freshman this year, class of 2025. He is a kind of a borderline, 247 has him as a 4-star. Their composite has him as a 4-star. They have him as, a really high 3-star, just below 4-star. So he's a blue chip prospect, depending on what service you want to use and all that. I think he's a really talented guy. He's a kid that just wins football games. He's definitely a gamer. He's mobile. He's got a great arm. I think, a year, 2 years spent behind Rocco will do wonders for him in terms of his development and all that. Dukester's absolutely right here. Mansky has a ton of potential arm size, arm strength stuff that you can't teach, and that's I couldn't agree more. As a physical prospect, Alex Mansky is up there. I hate to use this comparison because of just like everything that goes with it, but if you're looking just at it from a physical tools standpoint, I look at a guy like Jacob Park that is at Iowa State. Now, Alex Mansky, the person, I believe is in a significantly better place as a human being than Jacob Park, the person, was. But Jacob Park, the football player, the quarterback, was an inarguably extremely talented passer. He had an amazing arm that he can make all the throws. He was mobile enough to be dangerous. Had Jacob Park had his personal life and his mental health and all that, in order, I think he's probably playing in the NFL right now. From a purely a physical tools standpoint, I think Alex Mansky resembles Jacob Park kind of a lot. And I really like the way he plays. He's a gamer. He just makes good football plays to win games. And Iowa State had great success with guys like that. When you look at Rocco Becht and Brock Purdy, both of those guys were gamers. When you needed plays to get made, they made them. And that's just the kind of guy you're looking for. And that's the way Brock Purdy is in the NFL too. And I think Brock Purdy's ascension in the NFL has been a big boon for small quarterbacks, for smaller quarterbacks, from smaller schools, from Iowa State specifically, saying like, hey, by the way, your quarterback doesn't need to be 6'4". He doesn't need to come from a blue blood. If the kid wins football games and he's a smart kid that wants to work and wants to learn, he can make it in the, and has at least like average physical tools. You can make it in the NFL, especially if you have a half competent offensive coordinator that can design a scheme around a guy. Brock Purdy is currently paving the way for Rocco Becht to have an NFL career because they're pretty similar players. Rocco may be a little bit more hard nosed runner than as a little bit more of a run threat than Brock Purdy was. Brock Purdy was kind of squirrely and just kind of picked up the yards he could. Rocco is someone you can really design runs for and be fine with or whatever. He's over his career has been less turnover prone than Brock was, so it's interesting. But Brock Purdy's currently paving the way for Rocco, and Rocco will pave the way for Connor Mobley, Alex Mansky, whatever it is. Those two guys will get 2 years to sort itself out for who comes next after Rocco. But the great part is that you have your next 4 years covered, no matter what. Your 4 years for this program are covered. And you feel pretty good about any of those three guys, whatever combination of those three guys over the next 4 years, you're confident that you feel pretty good about those guys taking snaps for your quarterback. So while it would have been nice to have a blue chip guy at quarterback out of this class, missing on him is not the end of the world. They can take a guy now, this class, that maybe he's a little bit more of a project, great physical tools, but needs to work on accuracy, work on his, processing reads, whatever that looks like. You can take a project quarterback in this class because you have time to develop them. Because you've got at minimum, you've got your next 3 years covered. You probably got 4, assuming, Mansky sticks around and is developing and all that good stuff. I would say you've got 4 years now. You see, even the 2026 quarterback can sit back for probably 3 years and learn and whatever else. Now, will today's recruits want to sit for 3 years, sit behind a guy for 3 years and wait their turn? I don't know. A lot of guys don't want to do that anymore. But Matt Campbell's players have had a history of doing that, even in this time of NIL. There's a reason we haven't seen Iowa State be decimated by transfers. Guys have transferred out, but star players aren't leaving, big time contributors aren't leaving, or even young promising freshmen that know that their time is coming. They aren't leaving either. The ones you're seeing leaving are the ones that they haven't broken through and they just don't think they're going to break through. Those are the ones you see leaving, and I know I have talked to people in the know before that they can't figure out why Iowa State keeps retaining players, that why they are not able to buy players off of Iowa State's roster. A lot of teams tried to go after TJ Tampa. A lot of teams have tried to go after Dominique Orange. Though the name I heard this past offseason that lots of teams were gunning for was Brendan Black. I'm sure, and we know that Rocco got offered a bag by somebody, probably Ohio State, and probably Tennessee. Got offered a ton of money for both of those schools. They're not leaving, and that's because Matt Campbell has a tradition of developing guys and now putting them in the NFL and them being productive NFL players. So all this is to say Iowa State will be fine without Jet Tamale. It's a bummer that he's not coming. We wish him the best doing his own thing, but I just think that Iowa State will be just fine because they've done a great job recruiting and developing that position. Now, the guy I kind of sort of alluded to here is someone that they could take is a guy named Eason Webb. So Eason Webb was, they previously talked to him a little bit in the recruiting class, but then once they decided to focus on Jet Tamala, that's who they went with. They recruited Jet exclusively. And Eason Webb was originally committed to Oklahoma State to play baseball. Well, I believe it was just yesterday, he decommitted from Oklahoma State for baseball. And the same day, we found out he has scheduled an official visit at Iowa State this week already. So if it's just me connecting the dots, I would say Iowa State's got a decent shot at this. He did just recently take a visit to Georgia Tech, so he would be, that would be in play for him if that's what that's what he wanted to do. But I think it's notable that, he visited Georgia Tech on June 6th, and he was still committed to play baseball at Oklahoma State till yesterday. Yesterday, he decommitted and is now taking, has a visit scheduled for Iowa State this week. I think that's notable Not no disrespect to Georgia Tech, but he didn't decommit from baseball to go play football at Georgia Tech because he could have done that 2 weeks ago. He did decommit from baseball and is now visiting Iowa State on extremely short notice. And my guess is they would probably have Easton work out because I know he hasn't been, he's been committed for baseball, so he hasn't been at camps and stuff like that. I don't think. Um, so they may have him work out in Ames this week and just to see him in person. But I think the I think the baseball thing is notable though. Um, Obviously baseball players typically have pretty good arms as it relates to football, so you expect to have some decent arm talent there, and some mobility there as well. It My guess is he's a good athlete, but he's probably raw in terms of like reading coverages and things like that. I haven't had a chance to watch through his tape yet, but that would be my guess is that it's more of um a mental thing as far as developing him and then getting his accuracy in line. But my guess is he's probably fairly mobile and he's probably got a pretty decent arm. But 247 has him rated as an 86, so a mid 3-star guy. Nothing to scoff at. Um, not a huge offer list, just Georgia Tech there as far as the Power Four programs go, but that typically hasn't mattered all that much for Iowa State. They've had plenty of good success with guys with you know few if any offers and have turned them into great players. Will McDonald famously came out. His only, I believe, I want to say his only other offer was like Northern Illinois or something. He only had one other offer, and I think it was a G4. It was a G5 school, and then I would say turn him into a first round pick as a defensive end, and now he's really turning into a nice player in the NFL. And so this will be a name to watch. If he's on an official visit this week, I think it's Wednesday and Thursday. I think that's what I thought I saw. Keep an eye out. If all of that goes well, my guess is that just based on him decommitting from baseball is that he's ready to commit to a football career as soon as he finds something. So I think if this thing all goes well, you could probably see a commitment from him. I don't know what the timeline would look like, but you could probably see a commitment from him pretty quick, I would imagine. Maybe this week, but probably like early next week. If everything goes well and he decides to come to Iowa State, my guess is you would probably see a commitment from him before the next show next week. So we're going to keep an eye on that. He's an interesting player. Got good size, probably, should have a pretty decent arm, given that he's a baseball player. But probably more of a project, and that's okay. They've built that room to a spot where you can take on a project right now. Okay. So that was Easton Webb. The next kind of, but you lose a commit to Bama. You are returning a new quarterback. They did have two different commits this week, though. They did have two different commitments on the defensive line this week, which were both pretty interesting. First one up, was Brian Wessel. He is a defensive lineman from Jackson, Missouri. Let me pull up his 247 profile here really quick. So Brian Wessel, 247 has him rated higher than the rest of the industry, but he's hanging out in the mid to upper tier of the 3-star. 6'5", 260 is awesome size for a freshman defensive line. I love that size right there. I don't know. I would assume at that size coming out of high school that they're probably thinking about him as a defensive tackle. But it's kind of hard to say. If they think he's going to be a defensive end, he's basically at size right now, and you just need to change some of them over to muscle college. This is just a highlight video, but let's see. So he's lining up. Okay, this is worth noting. All right. So Brian Wessel, he's listed as a defensive tackle on his profile, but actually, now that I think about it, I believe Brian Wessel is actually going to end up playing offensive line for Iowa State. think. Let me just check, but I'm pretty sure I'm fairly confident that Iowa State has him as an offensive lineman. But he could play both ways, or both ways, either side, I should say. Um, yeah, so they're showing him as an offensive tackle here. That would be my guess, is that they're going to keep him as an offensive tackle. He's, either way, he's playing both sides of the ball in high school. You like that he can play nose tackle spot in high school. That's an aggressive position. That's the type of mentality that Ryan Clanton usually likes to see from typically likes to see from his guys. They're just being really aggressive and physical. But either way, 6'5", 260 coming out of high school is awesome size. You can do a whole lot with that. I honestly, regardless of which side he's playing, I would assume he's going to play offensive tackle. But that's really big. That's really big for a guy coming out of high school, no matter where he's playing. So interesting. The interesting commitment there. We'll see a little bit more out of him. The other one here is Ajibola Afuye. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I got to change my screen here. Sorry about that. Okay, so Ajibola Afuye is out of Stillwater, Minnesota. His only other offer per 247 anyways is from UNI, but he did get a look from Minnesota. 6'4", 230. He is actually a defensive lineman. My guess, just based on his physical profile, and let's actually look at his highlight tape just a touch, because I haven't had a chance to watch him just yet, and haven't had a chance to watch him too much just yet. Let's see here. Oh, dang it. Went to a different window on me. I have a little bit of technical issues. Sharing so many screens here, it's getting crazy. Here we go. Okay. So let's take a look here at Ajibola. Let's see, I missed him here. Okay, so that was probably him there. Okay. So they're lining him up as a stand-up edge rusher there. Coming off the edge. Nice. Like that. Okay. So I'm seeing I'm seeing really what I needed to see here, which is that they see him as the heir apparent to Will McDonald. They see him as an under-recruited athlete that's got decent size, maybe a touch underweight. 6'4", 230. Will McDonald came out at like 6'4", like 215. So he is way down. But Afuye's probably got room to put on 15, 20, 30 pounds. If he could play at 6'4", 250 as an edge rusher in college, I think that'd be perfect. I see him as the heir apparent to Will McDonald, where he's just a raw athlete that eventually becomes a really, really high end pass rusher if he can put it all together. So an interesting player there for sure. Obviously it's had good success with that type of player in the past. So the other kind of big storyline from this past weekend and actually literally today is that Iowa State is currently on the hunt for a couple blue chip tight ends in this class. And the higher ranked one, I believe, is Ian Pramer out of Great Bend, Kansas. Let me pull him up. So Ian Pramer, Great Bend, Kansas. He is, he's every bit of a 4-star guy. Even the 247 composite has him pushing 5 stars, really. But he is a high-end tight end prospect. This past weekend, Iowa State had him on an official visit. I haven't heard anything. From what I understand, is it's pretty hard to get information out of that camp. I'm not the kind of I'm not the guy that starts calling recruits. That's for other people to do. So, but from what I understand is that that camp's pretty quiet, but had an official visit this weekend up in Ames. He is at Notre Dame today. This list right here of all your warm schools, Kansas State, Notre Dame, Iowa State, Kansas, that seems to be a pretty solid 4 for him. Um, the thought, I think from what I understand, the general consensus is that he is probably more likely to stay closer to home, which would mean Kansas State, Kansas, or Iowa State. Kansas State, Kansas State are obviously a little bit closer. But all three schools use tight ends. I would say I would argue that Iowa State uses them more and more effectively than the other two. But it's personal preference. But I think from what I understand, Iowa State is right in the hunt for Ian Pramer. Had him on an official visit this weekend. He was in South Bend today, I believe. We'll see. The thought that from what I understand anyway is that unless this Notre Dame visit goes crazy, they're probably in quote unquote fourth place for Ian Pramer. But we'll see. They've got obviously they're Notre Dame. They've got a tremendous tradition of tight ends. They've got as good a shot as anybody. But really interesting talent there. Obviously, I would love to have that. The tight end room is already very good, but you'll be losing a couple guys by the time Pramer is ready to go. So interesting player there. The other one that is of note here is going to be Evan Jacobson. And if the name Jacobson sounds familiar to you, that is because he is the younger brother of former Iowa State basketball player Michael Jacobson, who played at Iowa State, played basketball at Iowa State and Nebraska. But then once he left Iowa State, actually became I think he played in Europe for a year or two, but then he eventually has found his way into the NFL and has been on various NFL rosters and practice squads for the last 4 seasons as a tight end, which is really interesting. From what I understand is he was a very good high school tight end himself, and just decided to play basketball. That said, his little brother is indeed a very good tight end and will definitely be playing football and probably at a very high-end school. He's a 4-star across the board, 6'7", 220. He's a massive human being. Obviously coming from Waukee, right near there. From what I understand is all, Stanford, Texas A&M, Notre Dame, and Iowa State are all the leaders here. It sounds like Missouri has largely been ruled out. He said good things about, Notre Dame, I believe the quote was, for the Notre Dame visit this past weekend, because he was in South Bend this past weekend and is now in Ames today and tomorrow doing his official visit for Iowa State. The quote from his visit to South Bend was that they did a lot of the right things. Whatever that means. You'd have to imagine that Iowa State is right in the hunt here. Local kid, brother played here. I would say is a history of producing good tight ends. Lots of things working in the direction of Iowa State here. But again, Notre Dame is Notre Dame. They have a better history. They have an even better history of tight ends, and they are Notre Dame. Texas A&M, high-end school, lots of money. They don't win a lot of the big stuff, but they're Texas A&M. I'm sure they can write him a very large check. Stanford is the other one. From what I understand, is that one would be an academic thing, and because that their head coach situation is up in the air. Their GM Andrew Luck hired Frank Reich as an interim coach for this season. But I think Stanford's still trying to get themselves stabilized for right now because that program's kind of down in the dumps at the moment. Since David Shaw got fired or stepped down or whatever. Maybe he goes there. And if he goes to Stanford for the academics, I can't really blame him. It's Stanford. So if you're just talking about a football perspective, I would think that Iowa State, Notre Dame, and Texas A&M would definitely be his top 3. If he wanted to stay closer to home and be potentially a starter very early on in his career, I think Iowa State would be a great fit. But we will see. He was in Notre Dame. He was in South Bend on Saturday and is in Ames today and tomorrow. So what it's worth noting that Iowa State is his most recent, will be his last official visit, I believe, per this list. Anyways, Iowa State is his last official visit, so he will be freshest in the mind there. If Iowa State can land either Kramer or Jacobson, I think that's a huge recruiting win. You love that. You feel great. I'd be blown away if they could get both of them. But if you could get one, that would be awesome. Iowa State had another tight end target from Kansas that actually committed to Kansas middle of last week. So that's, that guy's off the board, but it also takes up a spot at Kansas, which if Kramer wanted to commit to Kansas, I'm pretty sure that they would probably take him. I'm pretty sure Kansas would be fine with taking 2 tight ends in that class if you can get 2 guys like that. But, as far as Jacobson, if you could get either of them, that would be really awesome. And, I would say being Jacobson's last official visit, I think is meaningful. I think that would mean, I would think that would mean he would be making a decision fairly soon, but I don't, he could wait. I mean, honestly, he could wait a while. I don't know if he's going to get in necessarily any more offers because he's already a 4-star prospect. He's gotten pretty much all the high end offers. He's he's probably going to get, he's probably got, I'm sure he's got offers from all the big ones. There's, so there's Auburn, Florida State, Kansas State, Miami, Ohio State, Penn State. Yeah, he's got, sort of the SEC schools. He's got pretty much all of his big offers covered. So it's not like I don't think there's going to be any offer that comes up in the next, 6 months that would cause him to reconsider anything. It might, but it'd be an interesting race here. I think if they could land Evan Jacobson here, I think that would be phenomenal. If you can't get, if you take Ian Kramer, if you get Ian Kramer but not Evan Jacobson, great. Either one of those would be perfect. But if they don't land either of them, I'm not 100% sure what their plan's gonna be. Because like I said, the other one there was a that was on the board committed to Kansas last week. So I'm gonna look to see what they've got for offers out. Of course, and they could, doesn't necessarily have to be an offer that they have out right now. They may send, they may offer somebody kind of like they did this week where you offer somebody that camped or, something in that neighborhood. So I think, I'm not sure exactly what their plan's going to be. They might look at someone that they camped with, but you really want to land Evan Jacobson or Ian Kramer for this class if you can. So that's definitely a race to keep your eye on this week. I don't know what the commitment timelines look like for either Ian Kramer or Evan Jacobson. Given that this is Jacobson's last official visit, I would have to imagine that he would be coming sooner rather than later. Kramer, I think, has a visit with Kansas State next week, maybe. So that would be one to keep an eye on there. Actually, let me just see here. So Kramer's got a visit on June 20th. So Kramer's at Kansas State this weekend. He's already visited Kansas. He was here last week and he's at Notre Dame right now. He's got Kansas State this weekend. So, by sometime next week, if depending on how long it takes him to figure, come to a decision, this weekend is probably his last official visit too. Short of some random SEC school showing up out of nowhere and offering him, and then he goes on an unofficial visit or something like that. That doesn't ever happen. So, obviously did have a couple other official visitors this past weekend. Had a wide receiver and a linebacker for sure. I just want to check, make sure I've got all my names right here. So, because they got the commitments out of Ajibolufuye and Brian Wessel, which we think Brian Wessel's probably on the offensive line. Let's see here. Oh, I'm trying to find I mixed up my I mixed up my windows and my tabs over here. Rookie mistake. If anybody's got any questions that they want to ask about any of these recruits, about anything going on with Iowa State right now, or what's going on with me, it's yeah, would appreciate any of the questions too. Got a brother who builds PCs. If you need one, no, I appreciate that, but the problem is not the PC right now. The problem is that StreamYard is a little it's a little finicky on um like you can't queue up a bunch of windows at one time and stuff like that. It's very it can be very temperamental at times. It's a great piece of software, but it can be very temperamental at times. Um Bryson Williams is the receiver. That's there we go. So Bryson Williams is the receiver. He's out of Omaha. Another guy out of Omaha. Bryson, they've got him as an 87 overall. Or sorry, he's not a wide receiver, safety. He's a safety out of Omaha. As an 87 overall. I think this was a guy they offered him a little bit later in the class. 6'4", 175. Little bit small, a little bit on the smaller side, but that's tall. That's like Malik Verdon size territory. If you can get him in and get him in the weight room, get him 20 pounds, over 20 or 30 pounds over his freshman year, through a redshirt year, if you can do that, you can turn him into Malik Verdon pretty quick, and you hope that he can stay healthier than that. But we'll see. Braden Thomas is the other one. He's a linebacker. Sorry, Braden Thomas committed. Yeah, because that was one that they changed, that they chased. I'm getting all mixed up here. So Braden Thomas, there was a guy that they originally had to have him on campus, but he committed to Michigan State last weekend too. But they had another linebacker on campus from Bishop Heelan that is currently down to an Iowa State race as well. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. So that's kind of the recruiting roundup right now for June. It's been trying to keep all these offers and official visits and everything straight. But the main ones to keep watching here is the quarterback Easton Webb, since he's on, going to be on a visit here in the next couple days, and just decommitted as a baseball player. And this is probably going to be, I would say, its primary target at quarterback for this class. Now that Jet Tamala has gone to Bama, so keep an eye out on Easton Webb. And then we're also keeping an eye out on Ian Pramer and Evan Jacobson, the two tight ends, both of which Iowa State has a decent shot at. But we're competing. We are competing with some other really good schools there as well. We got a question here from the Dukester. Build the perfect running back only using Iowa State football running backs. Okay. I need Breece Hall's vision. Yes, Breece Hall's vision. He was just so good at vision and patience. He was so good at just at hitting his hole on time, finding the right cut back lanes. I think you have to go with, as far as toughness and balance, you'd be silly to not pick Dave Montgomery for that. Just an all-timer at staying on his feet, being tough, doing things. You love all that. Speed, Kene Nwangu. If you're looking for top end speed, it's got to be Kene Nwangu. There's a reason that he is, probably the best kick return in the NFL right now, and it's because he is faster than basically everybody. Let's see, what are we looking for? Elusiveness. Dave Montgomery's way up there in elusiveness. I mean, Breece Hall and Dave Montgomery were both very elusive in their own ways. Dave Montgomery was like, he can make you miss in a phone booth. Breece Hall was really good at lining a guy up, making a cut, and then running around him. So it wasn't so much tight quarters making guys miss like Dave Montgomery was. But his elusiveness was in the open field where he could make a cut and then get around you a lot faster than you were probably ready for. Frame. Boy, it's pretty hard to argue with Breece Hall. Like 6'2", 230, 225, something in there. Big running back that was, super athletic and all that. I mean, good running backs can come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, Dave Montgomery was smaller. He's like 5'10", built like a bowling ball. Then Brees Hall was a little bit taller, 6'2", 230. You know, if you're like, you know, they can come in lots of shapes and sizes depending on what you want. But if you're gonna ask me to pick one, I really like Brees Hall's frame. If you had Brees Hall's frame with Dave Montgomery's, toughness and, you know, short range, make you miss in a phone booth moves, you have pretty inarguably like the best running back, the best running back of the last 20 years in college football. Um, receiving ability. I mean, receiving ability is an interesting one because you've had some real, Brees Hall and Dave Montgomery were both very good receiving backs. I think I'm gonna just maybe try. Is there another like obvious option here? Like if you were gonna try to pick somebody other than one of those two, is there an obvious option for a receiving back? I don't know that there is. Like both of them are really good receivers. Um, maybe do like I don't know Alexander Robinson. Maybe if you were gonna try to find somebody else, maybe not sure. If you're gonna go for it, like power, if you're gonna go for power, ability to run people over, give me some Jeff Woody action. Well, it's either Jeff Woody or it's David Montgomery because David Montgomery absolutely would run over people. Um, it's really the perfect running back is Dave Montgomery with Brees Hall's size and his top and Brees Hall's top end speed. That's the perfect running back. It just is. But if we're trying to be a little bit more interesting here, another good sneaky like underrated running back catching out of the backfield is probably James White. If you guys remember him from the Paul Rhodes era, made some nice plays out of the backfield. I think he would be an interesting guy to put in there. Yeah, so this is a great point. Like David and Brees were the first ones to get really used a ton in the passing game. Because obviously, if you go back to the Paul Rhodes era, they didn't pass the running backs a ton, and most of the running backs were like they were fine. Like Alexander Robinson was good, James White was fine, but not really doing a ton. But then you go back to like you know the Dan McCarney era, they weren't throwing the running backs at all. Like Stevie Hicks didn't catch the ball out of the backfield hardly ever, and like Hiawatha Rutland and like J and so Wagner, Mike Wagner. I don't remember. Can't remember what his first name is, but like the Hiawatha Rutland and Wagner duo, they didn't really catch the ball. Tight, Troy Davis didn't catch the ball out of the backfield. So it's probably got to be one of those two if you're gonna, as far as a receiving threat goes. Um, but yeah, I mean, your perfect running back is just about any version, any combination of David Montgomery and Brees Hall that gets you to, Brees Hall or Canadian Nwangu's top end speed with Dave Montgomery's elusiveness and toughness and balance. Any combination of things beyond that is largely trivial because it's a running back that virtually nobody can deal with. I mean, at that point, you're talking about prime Saquon Barkley. Like at that point. Okay, I love this. Chantrell Johnson. I'm so glad you brought up Chantrell Johnson because he was at Iowa State when I was a student there, and I always remember that he was hurt a lot, but he was so shifty and elusive. Like you get him on the field, and he would always make somebody miss, and he was always just out there just jitterbug doing things. Like he was so shifty and elusive. It was kind of crazy to watch. But he was hurt a lot, and I remember it was funny because I remember I ran into him at a bar about maybe 5 years after he graduated. This would probably be, God, I don't know, 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. I ran into him at a bar in Des Moines, and I actually straight up told him, he's like, hey, I was like, hey man, just want to let you know that when I was in school, you were one of my favorite players to watch. Like I know you got hurt a lot, all that, but like one of my favorite players to watch, and he was like super appreciative and all that or whatever. But that's a great pull. Chantrell Johnson's elusiveness might be like up there if he was able to stay healthy. He's another player that like as like a fun like what if he was able to stay healthy the same way like Sam Richardson's a what if he played under Matt Campbell instead of Paul Rhodes and had what if he had Taylor Mauser as his offensive coordinator instead of Mark Mangino. That's a fun what if. Or if EJ Bibbs played for Taylor Mauser, like, oh god, he would be amazing. So fun what if there was Chantrell Johnson. Jarvis West is, I think, another fun one. He was a receiver, not a running back, but Jarvis West is another fun. What if he got to play for a Matt Campbell thing? Like what fun things could they do with him? Because I think he was every bit as athletic, if not more athletic, than like Jalen Noel was. So if you could develop him as a receiver the way Jalen Noel developed, and also have that shiftiness and athleticism, that'd be pretty fun. So great question. Um, Great question for to wrap up the show here. If anybody has any other ones, throw them in the chat right now. Otherwise, I think we are gonna wrap it up for this week. Appreciate everybody jumping in for this episode of Iowa State Cyclones live here on the Voice of College Football Network. The plan right now is we're going to be here every single week until Ireland. Basically, we'll have to figure something out because I'm going to be in Ireland for 2 weeks in a row. So I'm going to be there the entire week before the game, and I'm going to be there till Wednesday after the game. So not entirely sure what we're going to do for that just yet. It might be just like a quick, I do something on my phone type of thing. It might be pretty informal, but, um, we'll figure something out there. Do I think Jarvis West could have transitioned to a running back? I don't know, he's pretty small. I think if he was going to transition to a running back, I think you'd have to put some weight on him, and then he might lose some of that elusiveness. I think he's probably better off as a slot receiver, but interesting question. It's an interesting thing to contemplate either way. So appreciate everyone watching. We will be back again next week. Maybe have some recruiting news to talk about. I do like this idea, like this thing here. We're gonna we build the best quarterback with Iowa State quarterbacks, or we build the best receivers with Iowa State. We build the best receiver with Iowa State receivers and things like that. That's a really interesting idea. I might steal that for future episodes, or we'll do another one. We'll do the one at the end of each episode. Like next week, I'll build the best quarterback I can with Iowa State quarterbacks, and then next week we'll do the next week after that we'll do the best receiver we can. That's a fun idea. And I might do that as an article series on Wide Right and then do a longer analysis on it on here. That's a fun idea. So let's go ahead and wrap her up for this week. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll be here again next week, probably talking recruiting. We'll build a quarterback with Iowa State from our Iowa State quarterbacks, and we'll see what else comes up. Otherwise, like I said, we are just a few weeks away from College Football 26 coming out, from Big 12 Media Days down in Arlington, and then we're just a few weeks from that, from the start of camp, and then we're kicking off in Dublin, Ireland. So exciting times. The college football season is getting closer by the day. So thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you again next week.